You know, the NBA is interesting. You can go from having a generational talent and poised for another run at the championship one year to being in the midst of a full-on rebuild the next. Now, usually when franchises are put in this position, it takes them a while to deliver a sense of hope to their fan base that they could reach the levels that they reached at the time when they were with that star player. I mean, the Cavs, it took them years before they were able to deliver a glimpse of hope back to their fan base, but a team like Houston didn't waste any time after they moved on from James Harden. Now, it's only been a year and some months since that blockbuster trade that sent James Harden to Brooklyn, but since then, the Rockets have been having to rebuild so good that the next NBA dynasty might be brewing down south in Houston, Texas. Now, going into the 2020-2021 NBA season, it looked like Houston was headed toward NBA purgatory. They just traded Russell Westbrook's contract for John Wall. They hired a new coach in Steven Silas, who previously served as an assistant on the Dallas Mavericks. And Daryl Morey resigned, and he was replaced with Rafael Stone, who had been with the Rockets organization since 2005. And as for the actual roster, outside of James Harden, they didn't look very good. I mean, if your team's second best player is Eric Gordon, the chances are y'all won't be going very far if y'all make the playoffs. But by the time the All-Star break had arrived, the entire organization looked completely different, and it officially began this path of a full-on rebuild. And so far, it looks like they are headed towards the next NBA dynasty. Now, at the start of the season, Houston didn't really look very good. And most notably, James Harden didn't look very good either. He looked out of shape. There were reports going around that he was in a fat suit. That's how bad it looked. And after a while, it became quite obvious that he wanted out of Houston. And on January 14th, 2021, James Harden was sent to the Brooklyn Nets in a 4-team trade that sent shockwaves all throughout the NBA. The Nets got James Harden from the Rockets and a 2024 second-round pick from the Cavaliers. The Rockets got Victor Oladipo from the Pacers, Dante Exum from the Cavs, Kurucs from the Nets, and Kevin Porter Jr. from the Cavs as well. Now, as I just mentioned, Houston got a crazy haul for James Harden. They were able to get 8 first-round picks from 2022 all the way to 2027. And on top of that, they were able to keep majority of their own picks as well. Now, that year, as you can imagine, the Rockets sucked. They finished with a 17-55 record, and they finished 15th in the Western Conference. Now, obviously, this record put them safely in the lottery, and in the lottery, they were able to get the number 2 pick. And with the number 2 pick, they selected high school/G League superstar Jalen Green, who is a very high upside prospect with elite athleticism and a natural ability to put the ball in the basket. With the rest of their draft picks in this draft, they selected Turkish big man Alperen Sengun, forward Usman Garuba, and guard Josh Christopher. Now, the rebuild at this point was in full effect, as going into the 2021-2022 season, the Rockets had acquired 6 players who were 21 years or younger over the past year. Now, the goal of this season wasn't to be competitive or anything like that. The only thing they really needed to do was show the fans a couple of things this upcoming season. The first thing is Jalen Green has to show flashes of all-star talent. At this point, it is no secret that the Houston Rockets rebuild is heavily contingent on Jalen Green becoming the all-star talent that we know he can be. His combination of explosive leaping ability plus elite level acceleration and his outstanding ability to score the ball is something that we don't see too often. Now, we're not asking him to be a star player right away and have a rookie season like LeBron or Luka, but it would be very disappointing if he didn't show any flashes of what he can be in the future. The second thing is Kevin Porter Jr. and Christian Wood have to show that they've taken a step forward in their development. Now, at this point, Christian Wood was one of the more intriguing players in the NBA. The Rockets had acquired Christian Wood via sign and trade from the Pistons in 2020, And up to this point, he had built a reputation around the league as one of the better up-and-coming young players in the NBA. And the Houston Rockets front office, along with the fans of the Rockets, hoped he continue this trend going into the next season. KPJ also had a reputation around the league. He had struggled with some issues off the court in Cleveland, including the weapons charge and the outburst due to a locker change following the James Harden trade. Now, on January 21st, 2021, a couple of days after the James Harden trade, Kevin Porter Jr. was traded to the Houston Rockets, and immediately he was assigned to the Rockets G League affiliate and split time between the G League team and the official NBA team. In his time in the G League and on the Rockets, he showed flashes of what he could be, and all he had to do this season was build on this momentum. Now, the third thing was simple. Let the young guys get some experience and improve throughout the year. Now, like I mentioned before, in the past year, Houston had added a decent amount of young players to the roster. And since it was obvious they weren't going to be competitive, they really just need to put the young guys on the floor, let them build chemistry, gain experience, and have fun. That way you can put a fun and watchable product on the court and deliver a sense of hope to the fans that in the next few years, this team is going to be something. In the first official season of the new era in Houston, the team did pretty well. Although they finished with a 20-62 record, the season was definitely a success. Now, I would like to add, John Wall did not play this season due to a hamstring injury. It was only a few things Houston had to do this season for it to be considered a success, and they did pretty much all of them. As I mentioned before, Jalen Green had to show flashes of all-star potential, and at the start of the season, he did not do that. He struggled on the court and looked like what you would expect a rookie to look like. Now, he did have a couple of injuries, but even when he was out there, it just looked bad. He showed flashes of explosiveness one game, and then the next few games, he'd be a completely negative impact player. He kept on getting the ball stripped and poked away from him far too often, and this was partially due to his lack of strength, which was a concern coming into this season. Now, his best game of the season would come up against nobody other than the Los Angeles Lakers, where he put up 32 points in a 139-130 overtime home victory against the Lakers. And he played so well that even LeBron praised him. After this game, LeBron would say he has a great shot-making ability. Everybody looks at his athletic ability, but his ability to make shots, he's been doing this for quite a long time now, going back to high school. I feel like he's just getting better and better, and the great thing about him being in Houston is they're a super young group besides a few guys. It's allowing him to make mistakes and learn on the fly, and that's going to benefit him. And after this stretch and this game, I think it's safe to say that he for sure gave Rockets fans what they were looking for and delivered the optimism for the future and showed those flashes that we were hoping for. Next, we were hoping to see the continued development of Kevin Porter Jr. and Christian Wood. Now, Wood's second campaign with the Rockets began on a very promising note. He started the season averaging 19 points, 13 rebounds, and a block on 46.7% from the field. With this start, it appeared that Wood was well on his way to reach All-Star status, but the team struggled to start the season at 1-8. So, Coach Silas made a few adjustments to the game plan that ended in Wood not being featured as Houston's primary source of offense. Now, as you can imagine, Wood demonstrated his frustration with the nonchalant performance against Golden State a couple games later that saw him attempt a total of 5 shots. And after that, there was a clear disconnect between Wood and the franchise. Now, this wasn't the only time where Christian Wood's effort would cost him. He, along with another player, were suspended on a Monday night game against the 76ers after Coach John Lucas called out multiple players, and he was one of them. The reason for him being called out is effort level. Now, in the second half of this game, Wood refused to sub into the game, and he forced Coach Silas to say that it was his decision not to play Wood in the second half. Now, Wood continued to show a wave of dominance and inconsistency throughout the rest of the season and finished with averages of 17.8 points, 10.1 rebounds, and a block per game on 59.5 true shooting. But as he entered his final year of his contract, it is extremely unsure whether or not Wood has done enough to receive a long-term commitment from new general manager Raphael Stone, and it looked like he was on the way out. Now, as for Kevin Porter Jr., he experienced some growing pains to start out the season after he was named as Houston's starting point guard. He also did face some controversy this season as well. Remember that other player who was suspended along with Christian Wood during that Nuggets game? Yeah, it was Kevin Porter Jr. He was the other player who was called out by Coach Lucas. And not only did he end up arguing with the coach, he had to be separated from him, and he ended up leaving at halftime. And when I say leave, I mean he left the arena. That brother put on his clothes, turned his jersey in, got in his car, and left. This would only be a one-time occurrence, and he did get injured during the season, but this extra time off gave Porter a chance to correct his mistakes that he was experiencing on the court from afar. The game started to slow down for Porter, not only through film study, but also in-game conversations with John Wall. Now, after these injuries stopped lingering and he was removed from all the drama, when he returned to the court, he looked like a better version of himself and more of what the Rockets were looking for. Porter appeared to be more in control of his game, and he was no longer hindered by the consistent on-court thinking. And just like his buddy Jalen Green, he played much better during the second half of the season and even notched his first career triple-double versus the Kings. Now, I know him putting up a triple-double against the Kings doesn't move you, but seriously, this final month and a half of the season, he was phenomenal. He averaged 19 points, 6.1 assists, and only 2.5 turnovers, and showed enough flashes throughout the season to give hope to all Houston fans. And like I said, the last thing he needed to do was put a fun and watchable product on the court while letting the young guys gain experience. Now, head coach Stephen Silas didn't really do this the way you would expect. He let majority of young guys who earn playing time get it, and sometimes he would play his vets too much, but overall, we were able to see the young guys play. Alperen Sengun was able to show off his skill and advanced basketball IQ, and that was put on full display for everyone to see and gave the Rockets reason to move on from Christian Wood, or at least begin to entertain that idea. Now, as I mentioned before, Coach Silas would play his vets too much, and one of the rookies that suffered from this was Josh Christopher. But when he did get his minutes on the court, everybody knew, and he made an immediate impact every time he stepped out there on the court. On defense, he was a pest and only really struggled with his three-point shooting, as he only shot 30% from deep, and he showed that he needed to develop a little bit more control in his game. Now, as for Garuba, he was in the G League majority of the season, but when he did play, he looked very solid. He looked the part of a switchable wing/big, which is what many of us were thinking when the Rockets drafted him. He was also able to provide assistance at the rim and on the perimeter. And every time he was out there on the court, he was able to make an impact. Also, players like Jayshawn Tate and Dayshawn Nix also showed promise during the season. And after a successful 2022 campaign, the Rockets were faced with a couple of questions going into the offseason. Now, the first question, how will they handle the John Wall situation? He didn't fit the timeline, he didn't play the past season, yet and still his contract was holding the Rockets back and their ability to make moves and add more young guys to the roster. The second question was, how are they going to be able to follow up last year's draft? They had an amazing draft last year, and the question going into this season was, how can they build on that and improve the current rebuild that was going on? And the final question was, how will they handle players like Christian Wood and other vets on the team? The Rockets were in a rebuild, and with this rebuild, you don't really want a whole lot of vets on the team, especially when they're hogging up cap. And during the season, it was evident there was a disconnect between Christian Wood and the Houston Rockets. So how are they going to handle that situation? Now, the Rockets didn't waste any time trying to deal with the Christian Wood situation. On June 19th, 2022, the Rockets traded Christian Wood to the Dallas Mavericks for the number 26 overall pick in the 2022 NBA Draft, Boban Marjanovic, Trey Burke, Marquise Chris, and Sterling Brown. Now, this came as no surprise to anybody, as Christian Wood didn't entirely fit the timeline for the Rockets, and tension was beginning to form between him and the front office. Not to say they hated each other, but it was obvious that he didn't fit in with what the Rockets were doing anymore. Next, the Rockets had to figure out what they were going to do in this year's draft to build on last year's draft. Now, they came into this year's draft with the 3rd overall pick, and their job was extremely simple. Whoever fell to them at the 3rd pick is who they take. Now, up until draft night, it was reported that Jabari Smith Jr. from Auburn was going number 1 to the Magic, Chet Holmgren from Gonzaga was going number 2 to the Thunder, and Paolo from Duke was going number 3 to the Rockets. But on draft night, everything changed, and at the last second, it was reported that Paolo was going number 1, Chet was still going to go number 2, but Jabari was going to end up falling to number 3, and that is who the Rockets were going to be selecting. And when the draft came, this is exactly how things played out. And with the number 3 pick in the NBA draft, the Houston Rockets selected the sharpshooter out of Auburn, Jabari Smith Jr. So with their next pick, they drafted one of the best defensive players in the draft in forward Tari Eason out of LSU, and they also were able to snag one of the most reliable point guards in college basketball this past season in Ty Washington. Finally, they settled the John Wall situation by buying him out and allowing him to go to the Clippers. With Summer League coming up, it was time for these rookies that the Rockets had just drafted to show us what they are. And with their first few games on the NBA court playing up against NBA competition, it was very interesting to say the least. Now, offensively, Jabari Smith struggled. He wasn't really able to create his own shot. When he got the ball, he didn't really do a whole lot, but defensively, he looked good. And towards the end, he definitely did show glimpses of being a 3-and-D wing, and there was definitely some upside still there. Now, as expected, Tari Eason looked amazing defensively, and even showed us offensively, he has a little bit there too. In Ty Washington, he didn't blow anybody away, but he did show that he can definitely fit into the mode of a reliable point guard in the NBA, kind of similar to like what Tyus Jones did for the Grizzlies this past year. Now, it's safe to say, barring anything crazy happens in Houston, the Rockets are well on their way to contention in the future. Now, the Rockets won't be good for a long time, but with the moves they've made so far, they are for sure on the right path to getting back to the level they were at during the James Harden era. Thank you everybody for watching my video to the end. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to see more videos like this. Y'all be sure to check out my TikTok and my Twitter, which is linked down below in the description. And if you're a fan of football as well, subscribe to my football channel where I'll be doing the same thing I do here, just a football version. Y'all have a good day, man. Peace.